All right, so are you ready to get into some of the details of this FTC and Amazon thing? It's a pretty big deal, and there's a lot to unpack. I think everyone's heard the headlines by now.
Yeah, it's hard to miss, right? The FTC is taking on Amazon, and it's not just about some minor issue either.
No, definitely not. They're looking at whether Amazon has been tricking people into signing up for Prime,
Hmm.
and of course, whether they've been using their size to, kind of bully other companies in the market.
Like a monopoly. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The FTC is actually asking for a bit of a timeout.
Like a delay in the trial.
Right, a delay. And their reason, they say they're short on, well, people and money.
Wow. So the question is, can internal government issues actually slow down a huge legal fight against one of the biggest companies in the world?
It's a really good question. I mean, think about it. If the government can't even properly staff and fund its own regulatory agencies, how are they supposed to take on these massive corporations?
It does make you wonder, like, are we really equipped to handle these challenges in the tech world if we're struggling with basic resources?
So we're diving into all of that today. We're going to look at the FTC's argument, Amazon's response, and the judge's reaction to all of this, and of course what it could mean for consumers like us.
Sounds fascinating. Let's get into it.
Okay, so the FTC lawyer actually went before the judge and said they're dealing with some severe and unique resource constraints. They specifically talked about people leaving because of that email, the fork in the road, one from Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency.
Oh, right. The one that basically encouraged government workers to either commit to streamlining things or consider other options, like leaving their jobs.
Yeah, and a lot of people saw that as a push to downsize the government. And then on top of that, there's the hiring freeze. So the FTC can't even fill those empty positions.
It's kind of crazy how interconnected everything is. So you have this efficiency initiative that might be impacting the FTC's ability to handle a massive case like this one.
It really makes you think, huh? And it's not just about the number of people. The FTC is also dealing with logistical issues. They're in the middle of moving to this new office space. And, well, their words were, abandoned U.S.-side facility. And they have to do all of this while trying to keep up with the deadlines for this case.
Wow, they really are painting themselves as the underdog here, aren't they?
They definitely are. So let's flip the coin. What's Amazon saying about all of this?
Well, they're not exactly thrilled about a delay. Their lawyer basically argued that staff turnover is just a normal part of any business. It's not a good enough reason to put off such a big trial, especially when Amazon has been prepared to defend themselves for over 2 years now.
Yeah, I could see their point. I mean, think about the resources they've probably put into prepping for a trial in September. Delaying it now would probably be pretty disruptive and expensive for them.
Exactly. Amazon wants to get this over with and clear their name. Makes you think that they're pretty confident in their position, doesn't it?
It does. So we have these two sides, the FTC saying we need more time, and Amazon saying, let's get this show on the road. And in the middle of it all is the judge. And the judge actually seemed unsure if pushing things back by a couple of months would really solve the FTC's issues, especially because the FTC lawyer admitted that things might actually get worse.
So what now? Where does this leave us?
Well, we have this huge legal battle going on, and it feels like this whole delay request is just the beginning.
This specific case is interesting, sure, but it kind of makes you think about the bigger picture, right? If the FTC, a powerful agency, is having these problems, what does that say about regulating these tech giants in general, especially with how quickly the digital world is changing?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I'm curious, though, what are the actual accusations against Amazon? Like, what exactly does the FTC claim they did?
So the main thing the FTC is saying is that Amazon made it really easy to sign up for Prime, but then made it almost impossible to cancel. And they're saying Amazon did this on purpose to increase their Prime memberships and essentially trap customers in their system.
Sounds a little sneaky.
Yeah, that's what they're calling deceptive practices. But it's not just about Prime. They also have that other lawsuit in the works, the antitrust one, which is scheduled for 2026.
Right, the one where they claim Amazon is just too big and powerful.
Exactly. So the FTC is fighting these two separate but related legal battles, all while facing these resource problems.
It's a lot to handle.
It is, and it makes you think, what if they can't do it? What if they can't effectively handle these cases? What then?
Stay tuned. We'll dig into that and more in part 2.
It's a big question, right? What happens if the FTC isn't able to effectively prosecute these cases? Big implications, potentially.
Huge. Yeah, so before we get into that, let's go back to those political things we were talking about, like that fork in the road email. What was that all about again?
Right. So earlier this year, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, remember that whole project he started? They sent this email out to people working for the federal government, and it basically said, you need to get on board with streamlining the government or you should think about leaving.
Yeah, it was pretty blunt. A lot of people thought it meant he wanted to make the government smaller and change what it focused on.
And the FTC lawyer actually said that some people leaving the FTC was directly related to that email, so it might have contributed to their lack of resources now.
So you have this connection potentially between Musk's initiative and the FTC's ability to handle this huge case against Amazon. It adds another layer to everything.
It's definitely complicated. And then you have Amazon's relationship with then President Trump on the other side of things politically.
Yeah, the article mentions that Amazon was trying to, smooth things over with the Trump administration, like a lot of tech companies were after a kind of rocky start.
There were these reports about donations to Trump's inauguration and streaming deals for his shows, and even some talk about potential media influence. Again, we're not trying to pick sides or say anything specific, just giving all the details.
It does make you wonder, though, how all these relationships might be playing into this whole thing. Are they just background noise, or could they actually be influencing the case somehow?
It's a valid question, I think. It brings up a bigger issue of how political stuff and corporate influence can mix with legal battles and how that might affect things.
It's like a political thriller playing out in court. But let's get back to the main point. The FTC's argument that Amazon is using these deceptive practices and might even be a monopoly.
Right. Let's break down those accusations a little more, starting with the whole Prime enrollment thing. The FTC says that Amazon made it super easy to sign up for Prime, but then made it a huge pain to cancel.
Like a Hotel California situation.
Yes.
You can check in, but you can never leave.
Exactly. That's their argument, that Amazon used this to get more Prime members and keep them trapped in their system.
Which leads to the antitrust lawsuit that's coming up in 2026. That one goes beyond Prime and says that Amazon is using its power in online retail to stop competition and maybe even hurt customers.
Right. They're saying that Amazon used its power to control prices and limit choices, and that this is against the law because those antitrust laws are meant to keep things fair.
So it's like two battles. The FTC is fighting, one about the Prime stuff and the other about Amazon being too big and powerful.
Yeah.
And they're doing it all while being short on resources.
It's a lot, and it makes you wonder what would happen if the FTC can't actually win these cases.
That's a good question. What are the possible consequences if Amazon wins?
Well, if Amazon wins, it might make other big tech companies feel like they can get away with similar things, and it could also make it harder for regulators to really keep an eye on these companies.
And that could have a domino effect, right?
Yeah.
Less competition, higher prices for us, and more power in the hands of just a few companies.
Exactly. This case isn't just about Amazon. It's about the future of online markets. It's about the balance of power. And in the end, it's about what choices and protections we have as consumers.
It's a real David versus Goliath situation. And it could change how things work between the government, big tech companies, and people like us. But there's one more thing we haven't talked about yet. Public perception.
Right. You can't ignore that legal battles aren't just fought in courtrooms. Public opinion is huge because it shapes the story, influences politicians, and can even affect what judges decide.
So how are people reacting to this whole thing? Are they siding with the FTC and seeing Amazon as this big bully? Or are they with Amazon and think the government is overreaching?
It's hard to say. It seems like people are divided. Some people are worried about how much power Amazon has and that they might be doing things that aren't fair. But other people like how convenient and affordable Amazon is, and they like their services.
That's a tough one. On the one hand, people might be worried about Amazon's power, but on the other hand, they still use Amazon all the time for so many things.
It shows just how complicated our relationship with these big tech companies is. We like what they offer, but we also know that there are risks that come with how much power and influence they have.
And this whole case really makes us think about that. It makes us ask ourselves, how do we balance the good things like innovation and convenience with the need to protect ourselves and make sure there's fair competition?
That's exactly what the FTC is trying to figure out. Their job is to make sure companies like Amazon follow the rules and that people aren't being taken advantage of.
But like we said, the FTC has its own problems too. Those resource issues make you wonder if they can really do their job and regulate these big companies.
And that's why public opinion is so important. If people really feel like we need stronger regulations for tech companies, then that puts pressure on the government to give more resources to the FTC and make laws to help them do their job better.
But if people don't think we need more regulations, then it could make companies like Amazon feel like they don't have to listen to the government.
It's like a cycle. What people believe can actually make things happen. So if people think we need regulations, then it's more likely that the FTC will have the power to act. But if people don't care about regulations, then companies might feel like they can do whatever they want.
So what you're saying is that public opinion could actually affect the outcome of this case and the future of how we regulate technology in general.
Exactly. We have a role to play as consumers and citizens. Our voices matter.
What can we do to make sure our voices are heard?
First, we need to stay informed and talk about these issues. We need to understand how the digital economy works and why it's hard to regulate. Then we need to tell our elected officials what we think and make sure they create rules that protect us and keep things fair.
So as this case continues, we encourage everyone to stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. What do you think is the right balance of power between these big tech companies and the government? How can we make sure the online marketplace is fair?
Those are big questions, and there aren't any easy answers, but they're important questions to think about. The answers will change how we live online in the future and how technology affects our lives.
That's all for part 2. We'll be back for part 3, where we'll talk about what the public thinks and what it means for regulating technology in the future. All right, so we're back, and we've been talking about this whole FTC versus Amazon thing, the legal arguments, the political side of it, and now we're going to step outside the courtroom for a bit and talk about what everyone else thinks, what the public is saying.
Yeah, public perception, it's a big deal. Legal battles aren't just happening in courtrooms, you know. What people think can really affect how the story is told, how politicians react, and even what judges decide.
So what's the vibe out there? Are people supporting the FTC and seeing Amazon as this big bad corporation that needs to be controlled? Or are they more on Amazon's side thinking the government is overstepping its boundaries?
It's not that clear-cut, really. It seems like people are kind of split. Some people are definitely worried about how much power Amazon has and whether they're playing fair. But then you have others who really like Amazon and think they offer good prices and convenient services.
It's like a love-hate relationship with Amazon, right?
Yeah.
You might be concerned about their power, but you still use them all the time.
Exactly. It shows how complicated things are. We like the stuff these big tech companies offer, but we also know there are risks because they have so much influence.
And this case really brings all of that to the surface. It makes us think about how we balance the good stuff, like innovation and convenience, with the need for fair competition and making sure consumers are protected.
That's the tricky part the FTC is dealing with. They're supposed to make sure companies like Amazon follow the rules and that consumers aren't being taken advantage of.
But as we talked about, the FTC has its own problems too. They're short on resources, and that makes you question whether they can actually do their job and regulate these huge corporations.
And that's why public opinion matters so much. If people really want stronger rules for tech companies, then that puts pressure on the government to give the FTC more resources and pass laws that give them more power.
But if people don't really care about regulations, then companies like Amazon might think they can get away with more.
It's like a feedback loop. What people think can actually change what happens. If the public wants regulations, then the FTC is more likely to be able to enforce them. But if the public doesn't care, then companies might feel like they don't have to follow the rules.
So you're saying that what people think can actually affect the outcome of this case and how we regulate technology in general.
Absolutely. We have a role to play as consumers and as citizens. Our voices and our choices matter.
What can we do to make a difference?
It starts with staying informed and talking about these issues. We need to understand how the digital economy works and what makes it difficult to regulate. Then we need to let our elected officials know what we think and hold them accountable for making sure there are rules that protect consumers and promote fair competition.
So as this case goes on, we hope everyone listening will stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. What do we think is the right balance of power between these tech giants and the government? How can we make sure the online marketplace is a level playing field?
Those are big questions, and there aren't any easy answers, but they're so important to think about because the answers will affect how we live our lives online and how technology shapes our world.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us as we explored this whole FTC and Amazon situation. It's a complicated case with a lot of moving parts, but hopefully we've shed some light on what's at stake.
It's been a great discussion. I think it's crucial for everyone to understand these issues because they really do affect all of us.
Absolutely. And remember, this case isn't over yet, so stay tuned and keep those questions coming. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.